Hi viewers, before I started writing this script, there's a mild thought in a split second. Why did I decide to walk in Sigma path? In my childhood, before I choose this path, I used to believe that if a road was already built, it must exist for a reason. That if enough people walked it, it must be safe. That if elders approved it, it must lead somewhere worth reaching. And then I watched someone I knew step off that road, not loudly, not rebelliously, not with speeches or drama, but with a quiet certainty that unsettled everyone around him. No explosion, no announcement, just a slow refusal to continue pretending that the path in front of him felt true. What shook me wasn't that he left the route. It was that he didn't look lost after he did. That's when the thought hit with uncomfortable clarity. Some people would rather burn the map than follow a route that was never meant for them. The most dangerous thing is not getting lost. It's arriving somewhere that was never yours. The world is built on certainty, but some people are built for something that certainty cannot contain. Let's go deeper. Most people don't consciously design their life. They adopt it. They step into routines, expectations, timelines, and definitions of success that were shaped long before they had the language to question them. School points one way, family points another. Society quietly nudges the rest. And before most people realize it, they are already living inside a structure they never examined. The Sigma male, in simple terms, is someone who eventually realizes that the life he was handed does not feel like his own. He looks at the map and doesn't just see guidance. He also sees limits. He sees stories about who he is allowed to become. He sees assumptions about what enough looks like. And instead of forcing himself to fit neatly inside those boundaries, he slowly steps outside of them. Not to rebel, not to prove a point, not to impress anyone, but because living inside someone else's version of life begins to feel like a quiet suffocation, polite, orderly, and emotionally numbing. From the outside, his choices can look confusing, risky, or unnecessary. From the inside, they often feel like the first honest decisions he has ever made. And now let's check out 10 reasons why he burns the map. 1. He moves away from the map. When he realizes much of it was drawn by fear. Every life blueprint comes from somewhere. Most of the common paths people follow were built by earlier generations trying to avoid pain, instability, and uncertainty. There is wisdom in that, but there is also limitation. Entire routes were designed not around what is possible, but around what is least likely to hurt. Over time, some people begin to notice that many of the safe routes are shaped more by fear of loss than by hope for growth. The Sigma male often senses that early. He starts to see that many of the rules he inherited were not written by fulfilled people, but by cautious ones. Not by explorers, but by survivors. At first, he tries to follow the same path. He tells himself that maybe meaning will arrive later. Maybe fulfillment is delayed. Maybe dissatisfaction is just immaturity. But over time, something inside him refuses to settle. He begins to feel that protection and possibility are not the same thing. He steps away not because guidance is useless, but because he wants to separate warnings that protect from warnings that only restrain. And that distinction changes everything. 2. He lets go of the map. When comfort starts to feel like a ceiling, predictable paths offer stability. They also create routines that can quietly reduce curiosity and boldness. Over time, comfort can turn into a subtle form of stagnation. Days blur together. Risk feels unnecessary. Dreams shrink into manageable versions of themselves. The Sigma male doesn't chase hardship for the sake of suffering. He doesn't glorify struggle. But he does notice when ease begins to dull his attention to who he is becoming. He feels it when his questions fade and his hunger softens. He senses when the edges of his ambition grow rounded. When that happens, comfort begins to feel less like safety and more like a ceiling. Not oppressive, not dramatic, just limiting in a way that is hard to articulate, but impossible to ignore. So he chooses uncertainty, not because it feels good, but because it forces him to stay awake inside his own life. 3. He steps off the route. When he realizes following only guarantees arrival, not meaning. Most well-worn paths lead somewhere socially respected. A career, a role, a predictable identity. But arrival does not always equal fulfillment. Reaching the destination does not guarantee that the journey made sense to the person who walked it. The Sigma male often begins to feel that surviving inside a system is not the same as building a life that feels internally meaningful. He may reach milestones that others admire and still feel strangely distant from his own achievements. At first, he doubts himself. He assumes gratitude will come later. But the longer he pretends the emptiness is just fatigue, the louder it becomes. So he turns away from repetition and looks awkwardly at first for something that feels original to him. Not louder, not bigger, just truer. 4. He rejects the map. When rules begin to replace self-trust, rules stabilize groups. They also encourage people to silence their own judgment. Over time, many people stop asking whether something feels right and focus only on whether it is permitted. The Sigma male is someone who grows uncomfortable when external permission replaces internal discernment. He notices when obedience becomes easier than reflection, when compliance becomes automatic instead of thoughtful. He doesn't reject all rules. He simply refuses to let structure replace his conscience. When the map asks him to move in ways that contradict his inner understanding, friction forms. Stepping away from the map is his way of preserving self-trust in a world that often rewards self-abandonment. 5. He lets go of the map. When someone else's definition of success starts to feel heavy. Income, recognition, security, status. None of these are wrong. But when they become obligations instead of choices, they quietly drain meaning from effort. The Sigma male often reaches a point where the rewards he's chasing no longer match the cost of chasing them. The applause feels distant. The prestige feels abstract. The goals feel inherited rather than chosen. Slowly, he begins to redefine success in ways that are mostly invisible to others. Peace over status, autonomy over approval, direction over display, integrity over performance. Letting go of the map becomes less about rejecting success and more about releasing definitions that no longer fit. 6. He avoids predictability because it begins to feel like confinement. Predictability offers comfort, but it also creates pressure to remain the same. When every move becomes expected, growth can feel restricted. Identity begins to harden into a fixed shape. The Sigma male tends to adjust his life when he feels his choices becoming too easy to anticipate. Not out of chaos, but out of the need to remain internally free. He wants room to surprise himself. When his future becomes too obvious, he senses that something essential is shrinking. And rather than protecting that shrinkage with routine, he disrupts it with change. 7. He leaves the path when safety starts to replace discovery. Real change rarely happens where everything is protected. Growth needs some friction, some uncertainty, some exposure to the unknown. The Sigma male senses that his limits live beyond what feels secure. He doesn't search for danger. He searches for the edge where comfort ends and learning begins. He understands that protection can become a quiet prison when it lasts too long. So when safety starts to pacify his curiosity, he steps away before it numbs him completely. 8. He walks alone. When the crowd begins to shape his identity for him, large groups naturally flatten individuality. Shared direction becomes shared limitation. The longer someone moves with the crowd, the harder it becomes to hear their own internal voice. The Sigma male steps back when he feels himself becoming a copy rather than an original. Solitude becomes a way of hearing his own thoughts more clearly, of remembering who he was before he learned who he was supposed to be. Walking alone is not his rejection of others. It is his reconnection with himself. 9. He trusts discernment more than obedience. Some people are guided primarily by instruction, others by reflection. The Sigma male belongs to the second group, and this difference shapes every major decision he makes. Instruction offers speed, do this, go there, follow that. Reflection is slower, heavier, and often lonelier. It requires sitting with uncertainty, questioning motives, and facing the possibility that the accepted answer may not be the honest one. Many people prefer instruction because it reduces personal risk. The Sigma accepts the burden of reflection because it keeps his life aligned with what he actually believes. He tends to move only after he understands the reason beneath the rule. He watches not just what a rule demands, but what it produces in people over time. He studies outcomes, patterns, and the quiet trade-offs that never get mentioned publicly. He respects structure when it protects clarity and fairness, but he refuses to silence his conscience for convenience. When obedience asks him to betray his inner understanding, he chooses clarity, even if it costs him certainty, stability, or approval. Not because he enjoys uncertainty, but because living against his own judgment would quietly erode his self-respect. Burning the map here is not rebellion. It is responsibility, the willingness to carry the weight of one's own choices instead of outsourcing that weight to tradition, authority, or consensus. 10. He chooses the unknown, not for glory, but for growth. The unfamiliar carries risk, but it also carries the possibility of becoming someone new. The Sigma male moves toward the unknown not because it guarantees success, but because repetition no longer teaches him anything. He understands that comfort preserves who you are. Uncertainty transforms who you become. And when preservation begins to feel like stagnation, he chooses transformation, even when it scares him. On a final note, a Sigma male does not burn the map to prove superiority or defiance. More often than not, he steps away quietly because pretending to want what everyone else wants begins to feel dishonest. While others find safety in direction, he searches for meaning and self-responsibility. While many cling to familiar roots, he listens for his own understanding of where growth might live. In the end, he is not trying to be different. He is trying to be honest with himself about the life he can actually live. The map isn't wrong, it's just not meant for everyone.